Okay, so in this first recording, we're going to take a look specifically at the logic and the code used to display the club directory. And so this is a member feature, and you get to it if you're on the home page of the site. You click on club directory, and this particular page loads. And if we go here, you can see that the name of the file here is directory.asp, and that's just in the root of it's at the top level folder on the website. So it's in the highest directory in the file system. And the name of the file again is directory.asp. And so then this is the code used for directory.asp, 79 lines of code in total. The beginning of any ASP file, from a code perspective, always shows which other files it's referencing. So there's a database access file, and that's included all over the place. The goal is that basically anytime we're touching the database, all the logic that touches the database is in one single file. Now that's not actually the case. I've been kind of working towards moving all the code that touches the database into that file. That's not like what I inherited, but that's the model I'm moving towards, so that basically, if we wanted to change out the database at some point and move towards something a little bit more modern and more designed for the web, Microsoft Access is not really designed for the web, and that's what we're using right now as a database technology. If we wanted to swap out the database, if everything that touched the database was in a single file, then you wouldn't need to touch any code anywhere on the site except for that single file in order to swap out the database to something else. So my first goal is to try and get all the logic that touches the database into that one file, and then we can worry about actually switching databases at some point in the future. So anytime we touch the database, in this case we're getting the list of clubs, we need to include that because that's where the data itself comes from. Then in this page, there are two things that affect how this page is displayed. There is which state you want to filter the directory on. You can either view all clubs in all states, or you can view the clubs in one particular state in the directory. And then you have the option of seeing either a printable version of the page or a non-printable version of the page, just the page that would display. And the logic is slightly different in terms of what's shown, whether you choose the printable version or the non-printable version, but the same set of code and logic handles both the printable version and the version that just displays on your screen. So right here we're going to start by opening a connection to the database, because we're going to need to select, in a little while we're going to need to select data from the database. So we're going to open a connection to the database, and we are going to open a record set because we're going to be retrieving data from the database, and we want to loop over those rows in order to display the data about each club. From there, we are going to begin the page, and then we have this if then else statement. So if we are printing the page, then we just want to have the page have a nice white background. But if we're not printing the page, then we want to show the header. So if I go back to the page, the header is this section up here at the top. So it's the logo, the personalization area, and the list of all the links, the club directory, the standings. That's the header. And we want to show that if we're showing the page as we see it right here. But if we click print, you'll notice that in what's shown here, there is no header, right? You don't see any of that stuff. You just get a printout of the actual clubs themselves, which is nicer when you're doing a printable version. So you don't want to display all those links and the logo and that type of stuff when you're doing the printable version. So this is the logic that says, okay, if I'm doing the printable version, I just want a white background. Otherwise, if I'm showing it on the page, then show all those extra links and stuff like that. And we'll go over exactly all the logic for what's shown in those links at a later point. So then it opens up, writes out the header, local cribbage clubs. If you are not printing the page, then it will write out an option to print the page. And so that's what shows this link right here. Obviously, if you click to print it, it doesn't make sense to show a link to print it since that's what you've already selected. So we only want to show the link to print if we haven't already selected to print it. From there, it then makes a call to the database to begin getting the data. And so we're going to make actually two different calls to the database here. The first call to the database is to get the active club states. So we need to populate this drop-down with the list of which states we can choose from. And we only want a state to show up in this list if there's an active club in that state. If there are no active clubs in that state, it doesn't make sense to have it show up in the drop-down list. And so we make a call to get active club states. Now the code for that is actually not on this page. It's in this database access file that we referred to earlier. So if we go here, you can see that it makes a call to get active club states. And what that's doing is it's selecting the play state from the club table, and it's making sure that the club is in an active state. So all clubs that have ever existed remain in the database, whether they currently exist or not. Those that are active have an active status of true, and those clubs that no longer are playing have an active status of false. But for record keeping and history purposes, all the clubs in grassroots that have ever existed are in the database. And right now there's a bit of some weird logic. We should probably document sort of a set of action items or to-dos. So right now it's only showing clubs where the ID is between 1 and 499. As of right now, the physical clubs range in number from 1 to a little over 400. And so this logic is fine and works well until we add the 500th club. At the point where we add club number 500, a lot of code all over the site will no longer work because there's an assumption all over the place that the active physical clubs in the ACC are between 1 and 499. And so, we're at 400 now. At some point in the next decade, we need to go through and fix the entire site so that that assumption is no longer true, and we fix it all over the place so that it no longer, whether a club is active or not has nothing to is a real club, has nothing to do with its number. So that's what we're doing here. We're getting a list of states for the active clubs between 1 and 499, and then we are looping over those clubs, and we are just writing out the abbreviation for that particular state. We're getting a distinct list of states. So if the state is shown more than once, if there's more than one club, it'll only include that state name one time in the list, and then it loops over those states right here and writes those out, and that's what populates this drop down at the top of the page. After we've got the list of states and populated the drop down, then we need to actually write out the clubs and all the information. So you can see here, this is where it's writing out the header row of the number, the name, the location, the meets, and the contact information. That corresponds to this line here. And then after that, we are going to call get active clubs with the state filter. Now, if you want to see all the clubs, the state filter will be empty. Or if you want to see a specific club, that state filter will have the state, the specific state that you've selected in order to get those clubs. And then that get active clubs is, again, because we're going to the database to get the information, that's in this database access file. And there are two different choices here. So if the state filter is empty, I just want to get all the information for all the active clubs, and again we see this between 1 and 499, which we have to work on at some point. And then if the state filter is not empty, meaning you've asked for a specific state, then the logic is more or less the same, except that we also want to make sure that the state corresponds to the one that you've specifically asked for. And so that's what filters it down to only those particular clubs. So then we've got a list of clubs. We want to count how many there are, and so we start the count. We start the counter at 0, and each time we loop over a club, we're going to increment the number of clubs by 1. So we're just keeping a running count of the number of clubs. Then we're writing out each row one at a time. This logic here is saying if you take the club number and you divide it by 2 and the remainder is 0, then we want the background color to be gray. You'll notice here that every other club has, this row is white, this row has a background of gray, this is a background of white, this has a background of gray. This logic here, where it's checking the remainder when you divide by 2, is what decides that basically every other row will be white and every other row will be gray. And that just helps with being able to read and kind of visualize and separate the different clubs so that you can parse out the information visually easier. From there, it writes out all the information for the club. So it writes out the club ID. Club handle is where the name of the club is actually stored. Playing location, playing address, city, state. Writes out the link to the Yahoo map, so that if you click on it, you can see exactly where that club is on the map, as well as the frequency, playing time, playing season, and then the contact information for the club director. All this information comes from what the club directors enter on their club information page within their admin section of the site. So this information is only as good as the information that the club directors enter and maintain for themselves. So we're going to loop over every single club. And then when we're done, we're going to close the connection to the database because we've finished writing out all the information. And anytime you open a connection to the database, you want to make sure and close that connection to the database so that you don't have lots of open connections lying around, which can slow things down. So we're going to close the record set. We're going to close the connection to the database. If we're not printing the page, we're going to show the number of clubs at the bottom. So we've just looped over all the clubs. We've got a count of them. Now we're going to show that. So for example, here at the very bottom, since this isn't the printable version, it shows the number of clubs and how many it just listed out. After that, the next piece of logic here is if we are not printing it, then we want to show the footer. So the footer includes all these links at the bottom, and including the copyright. So if we're looking at a page on the site, we want to show the footer. Again, if we click the printable version, you'll notice that in addition to no header, there is also no footer as well. And so that's the logic that's saying only show the footer if it's not the printable version. And then finally, if it is the printable version, then after we've written out the page, we want to make this call here using JavaScript, which is this is the piece of code that actually pops up the print window so that you can see the preview and actually click to print. And so, so that's, when I click print here, it reloads the page, and then it pops up. You'll see this pop up. The reason this pops up is because of this little piece of code here. We're only printing on. You'll notice this if-else here. It checks to see that the browser that you are using is modern enough to be able to print. And if it has the capability to print, that's what this if statement is saying. If it has the ability to print, then go ahead and print. Otherwise, it will actually pop up an error message to tell you that that feature is not available for that specific browser. I'm not sure. At this point, I'd be surprised if there were any browsers that didn't have this capability. But it's in there. It's been in the code for a long time. So it's just trying to alert you if you don't have kind of print capability with your browser. And so that's the logic and code for the club directory page.